Hey everyone. Today I'm joined by Alex Johnson. Alex is currently Chief Supply Chain and Business Transformation Officer at Clinigen, with a previous tenure at Ecolab and various businesses in senior leadership roles. Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Looking forward to today's podcast.
No, I really appreciate you taking the time. I guess a good place to start. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey so far?
Sure. So I'm currently working for a pharmaceuticals business, Clinigen. We really focus on that pathway through of hard-to-reach medicines globally. I've been there 2 years. Originally went in as the Chief Transformation Officer. That role's since been expanded to include supply chain. Before going into Clinigen, I'd spent 4 years contracting through my own consultancy business, worked for a number of major firms working through their transformation. But it's really the run up to that time where I went and set up my own consultancy, where I really learned and evolved myself through various levels of transformation in business. So I started out in FedEx, TNT, formerly before the takeover, on their graduate scheme, and worked my way through there. Really involved in network operations, had real exposure across the whole end-to-end business, and then went into BP, British Petroleum, learned a hell of a lot working across EMEA, and then really that step leadership change was going into Ecolab, where lots of exposure working in manufacturing, responsible for global operational excellence and the European transformation program. So lots going on, busy role, but still loving supply chain. It's varied, different role every day. But I think the key thing for me personally is my path from the shop floor. So at 16, I was lifting boxes in an express delivery company, really learned about the basics of supply chain. I've done pretty much every role in operations, and that's important because when you're leading operations, it's important you understand the roles people are doing, that you've perhaps done all of those roles. And I find that really helpful at a senior leadership level.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. During your earlier career in some of those more operational roles, can you tell me what was some of the most important advice that you personally were given by your mentors during that stage of your career?
So I was lucky enough to have a number of great mentors, I'll call them, but leaders that I reported to over the years. Various businesses from TNT, FedEx, Raw Mail, and most lately in Ecolab. One of the key takeaways was the dinner table conversation. That was really drilled into me during a particular time in a company where really trying to think about your actions you're taking as a leader. And as you move into more senior leadership roles, what's the dinner table conversation? What does that mean? That means just thinking about, on a few occasions, I've worked through a site closure. It's really difficult for the people involved in that, and you have to respect that. And I've always found that lesson learned at the dinner table conversation. What are people talking about when they go home from work? How has their day been? How have you impacted that individual? Because you do. And it's important that you understand that dinner table conversation and you use that to make the best leadership decisions you can to take people with you, whilst also trying to deliver successful performance for the company. The second one is going to where the work is actually done. So I'm a big fan of what they call Gemba walks, which is essentially go to the actual place. And I now still run, even at a senior leadership level, I still run every week. Whenever I go to a site, I run a Gemba walk. So I walk with the frontline members of staff, the supervisor or operational manager, and walk the site, go to every area, talk about 5S standards around sorting, selecting, standardizing, and systemizing how we work. I'm really taking interest in people on the front packing desk, all the way through to final delivery out to the site. And then the final one would be defects of diamonds. So you always find failure modes across the operation. you find a lot of those by doing Gemble walks, but it's about trying to be in the 30% club because 70% of transformations fail. People talk about that a lot, but you really need to understand what needs to be true to make the turn. So I do not see pain points or failure modes, whatever you want to call them, as a problem. Actually, it's good to acknowledge them, to quickly understand them, get to the root cause, and work with the team to fix those because mindless tasks, and we've had that going into Clinigen. Um, very highly qualified people, but stuck in tasks that do not make sense for the capability they have. And so releasing them, bringing the water level down is where I'm at as a leader, trying to make functional ways of working just easy and allow people to rise and become a star or just do their job without being held back.
Oh, amazing. Thank you very much. And I like the perspective, particularly of walking the shop floor, being in the operation. I think more and more nowadays, depending on how large your geographical scope is, how large the role is, there is a temptation to manage remotely, to not do that as often as people maybe should and maybe used to. And yeah, I hear that from time to time. I find that myself, if I'm working with a client and I've gone to their site and walked their site, it's a lot easier for me to comment on it when I'm talking to prospective candidates and employers. And yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. One thing that people are talking about a lot, and I'm curious to get your perspective, particularly with all the transformation experience you've done. Supply chain has changed a lot, is changing a lot, and will continue to change a lot. What do you think are some of the most important skills that future supply chain leaders should be looking at developing today?
So great question. And the reason I'm smiling is, of course, the current buzzword is AI. Before then, it was agile. And a mistake was made with the agile conversation in business generally, but also in supply chain. People would put agile at the front or the end of every conversation just to make it sound like we were doing agile. And the same goes for a few years ago, it was transformation. So everything had to be about transformation and so on. And we're seeing a little bit of that creeping in with AI, but this time it's different. It's not going to go away. I'm absolutely convinced by that. I'm also convinced by the leverage it's giving us now in supply chain to move faster than we ever did before. So I currently run the data analytics team or oversee it. I've got a really successful leader running that day to day in the Clinigen business. And moving away from analog KPI reporting into real time. And the really interesting piece with AI that I'm finding in the supply chain is that, previously you would have gone to a big SaaS solution to look at providing data to then review options of either network strategies or a different way of working on a sales commercial plan. Now, on quite a few of those occasions, you can move fast with simply working through an AI solution to that. And you can get to that solution in weeks rather than months. And sometimes it can take over a year to do other network studies. So AI is a big one, but it's about demystifying the language. Yeah, so it's not as complex as people think. Last year, when I was working with for a 2 week period with Google on reviewing an excess and obsolete option, it was really interesting to learn that coding. You don't have to be a coder to be in Google now. You just have to be very smart at working at pace. One of the things they do in Google, every meeting they talk about how might we, and that's something we've stolen with pride and brought that into my team at Clinigen. In the top right hand corner, we always write HMW. How might we do this differently? And that just makes us think through. Don't be scared about the language models and everything else. They're actually there to help you now, which means anyone can do this work in the analytical piece at a 101 level just to get things moving. I think one of the key things for supply chain leaders of the future, those that are in slightly more junior roles or managerial roles looking to move through is really know operational excellence and know it well. So I've been really fortunate enough to have some great people that I've been able to learn from throughout my career journey, and some people that have done 20 or 30 years specifically just in operational excellence. And I just sat there and learned, walked the floor with them. And that's really stood me in good stead of how to process map. And really in supply chain, it's all about understanding the process. Um, and the other two items are S&OP, so sales and operational planning, and sales and operational execution, which is sometimes missed. What are the quick win tactical things you can do in execution linked to sales and operational planning, and what's the drumbeat for forecasts and how we manage that? And finding that people that work through that area, it opens up their career across the supply chain, because once you start knitting together commercial and supply chain and operations, you have so many opportunities to go in many different paths across your supply chain career at that point. Plus, you've gained the confidence of the commercial side, which is absolutely vital. And the final point I'd say is, and it's something we're working on at the moment in Clinigen, but something I was fortunate enough to be classically trained on throughout key elements of my career, both at FedEx, Royal Mail, BP, and at Ecolab, where in some of those roles I was leading the strategy build for supply chain. And that is three things: really understand the voice of the customer. What is the customer really telling, the type of service they want from us, and what that all looks like. And then for the commercial team to secondly make that clear in the voice of the business. What do they want from the supply chain? Otherwise, you're always going to be misfiring, creating a network or a capability that doesn't make sense. That enables them to really, what I would call, hold the pen and be clear to supply chain what the business needs from them. And then finally, voice of process. And that's where supply chain really comes in. They've listened to the voice of customer, articulated that in the voice of the business from the commercial leads. And then the supply chain can go and optimize, improve, grow, and develop the supply chain alongside the growth trajectory and get that clear target operating model and that true north. And that's where a lot of supply chain misfires, and you can end up coming together with commercial rather than working with them. So I think there are three core areas that if people get really good in that space or get involved in that space, they can really move fast on their career, but also have a bit of fun at the same time. It's a really interesting job working in that S&OP, strategic, and also operational excellence.
No, amazing. Thank you. And I like what you said there around when I have these conversations, people always do say, make sure your supply chain is interfacing with commercial and interfacing with the wider business, because if you sit in a silo, you will be unsuccessful. And I think that's really good advice. But I also like that, you then looked across from there, but also look at the customer. What does the customer want? And look the whole way through that journey, because as you say, supply chain is a big part of any business, but it is still a part of the business. It's a supporting function for everyone else. Following that pathway will lead you to very strong success. So, no, brilliant advice. Alex, circling back to yourself and your career, I know obviously you've come from businesses like Ecolab, FedEx in the past, and then recently stepped into a private equity environment with Clinigen. I'm curious, how have you found that transition, and what advice would you give to someone considering a similar move?
So, how I ended up working in private equity was really when I came out of the more direct corporate in-house role, and I decided to go into consulting because, and it was my choice. My timing was excellent. I left the safety net of an S&P 500 business the week that COVID hit, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? But I was only out for a couple of weeks before I landed my first piece of contract work through my consultancy with a company called Belron. What I learned from coming out of almost the safety net sometimes of a large corporate, is that you're only as good as today's day rate, and you have to be really match fit. And going into consulting, I used every single lesson learned, every 1% factor over the years, almost nearly every day in trying to deliver for my clients. And then as part of that work over the years, I then moved into work for a private equity business. And you know, I was asked to close down two sites as part of an integration. And normally you would have 18 months to do that. And I was told, well, Alex, you've got 6 months. And I think, my goodness, how do I do this? And it's made me a better leader. I really enjoy private equity to a point because it's very matter of fact, it's very straightforward, it's performance driven, um, it's results driven as well. And I'm hoping I'm bringing a bit of humanity to it as well. So um, there's a certain reputation with private equity, and some of that can be true. But what I'm finding is that actually there is a place for driving pragmatic, workable transformation and taking your people with you, as opposed to just cutting costs, etc. Um, so I really enjoy the private equity space. I enjoy the corporate space. But for me personally, I feel it's made me a better leader because you're not pigeonholed. You have to find a way. You're given a mandate to go make it happen and beg for forgiveness later on. And I quite, I'm thriving at the moment in that environment of being given the mandate to go and make the change.
No, brilliant. When I speak with people that have done a private equity cycle, whether that's now they've exited and gone back into a Fortune 500, or whether they've remained in that world, they leave with so many new skills that I think I always encourage people to try it. It's not necessarily for everyone, but the amount that you learn in a couple of years in private equity, from what I can tell, can be the same as 5 or 10 years in another business. And I think it's always advantageous to try that so long as you know what you're getting into and the differences that come with that. So, no, really, really good advice there. And then Alex, finally, I always like to ask people, now looking back on your career and with what you know now, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting out their career in supply chain?
So it's funny you should ask this question. So I had a graduate who's still studying reach out to me the other week, and so I'm a little bit more match fit on this now because I went through it at the weekend trying to help them. But um, so really, it's about mastering a language now. So yeah, there's lots of workarounds for that and so on. But if you can master a language, I think it's really going to help you with that supply chain ambition to perhaps move into Europe and beyond into Asia Pac. There's some fantastic opportunities in Europe, but also going over into Asia Pacific. And no matter which language you learn or you become a master of, it's going to help you. It's going to be quite ambidextrous in helping you with your career. Um, the second piece is being really focused on the 80/20. So that's the kind of classical approach to operational excellence, continuous improvement. What's the 80 for the 20? Having that very focused mindset of where can I get something across the line that's going to be 20% of my time and effort, but give me 80% of the improvement. And learning, even though it's sometimes seen as an older way of working, it still resonates. It's still true today around Lean Six Sigma. So some of the toolkits I've learned and I've stolen with pride, just some basic elements of that have stood me in good stead around when you're looking to process map. But whatever you're doing, AI is one of the biggest pieces at the moment where there's now feedback that a lot of AI projects are failing, but they're only failing because people think that AI is the objective. It's absolutely crucial, but it's an enabler. But to make it become as powerful as it should be, you need to understand how to map a process, rebuild that process, and then plug in enabling tools such as AI and other to move faster and to sustain it. And then the final piece would be, it's something that I've seen time and again over the last few years when I've been more at a senior level in supply chain, and that is you can have the greatest minds, the most expensive consultants to come and advise you. But quite often as a leader, you just want somebody to come along and say, I'll take that for you, Alex. I'll go away and I'll have a look at that. And I'll come back to you with a solution. And if you're happy, I'll go and make it happen. And the value in that, and that's why I really focus on trying to build that high performance teams. And it can be almost as simple as just empowerment, giving people a chance. And that's what I really try. That's really important because people like that will then it works the other way as well, and just give them an opportunity. So that's something I've really learned, but also for those that are coming through at the start of their careers, you will get noticed. Take that opportunity, take that piece of work, make it happen, and trust me, you will get noticed. And quite often, more than not, it provides more value than some of those big expensive consultancies or some of the greatest minds. The people doing the work know how to, the best way to do it, just give them a chance and go and make that piece of work land and deliver.
No, amazing. And on the other side of things, what advice would you give to someone who is one step below the C-suite, who is about to take that step onto a board position? What advice would you give to that person?
So it's something I've learned more since I came out of large corporate and went contracting through my own consultancy for a while, but then into private equity, which is going into businesses at a senior level is challenging if you're not humble. You have to be humble to and capture the moment and the journey people have been on to that point. And it's important that it's nobody's fault. Sometimes you've not trained, developed those individuals, the business hasn't, and you've come in, you come from another business, you're new to everything, but you've got to be humble enough to just take a step back and listen, but then help to develop them to around the opportunity of a different way of working, and then give them the tools to do that. So that first element in the first 90 days of coming into a C-suite role, whether it's internally or into another company, it's that humbleness. And then something I've been following for a long time is drive, attitude, and confidence. Extremely driven, but again, intertwined with what we've just talked about being humble, creating the right attitude, and then backing yourself, having confidence. You're not going to get that C-suite opportunity if you're not backing yourself. So you've got to intertwine it well, that confidence of backing yourself, but being humble enough to listen, to take people with you. And then the final piece is that trust. So when you're taking opportunities for advancing people early on, or giving people a chance, that you trust your team from day one. And then if that trust is broken, then you give them another chance, but you work it through. And that's a way to move fast into the C-suite role successfully around just that humbleness, back yourself, but trust people and give them the opportunity to do the work. Let them go off and own that piece of work. You don't, and it's impossible to control everything because all you do is you frustrate people, you frustrate the business, and you frustrate yourself. So you've got to have that trust in your leadership team and support them every step of the way. And then people rise and become stars, and it helps you to be successful in that C-suite role.
Amazing. No, brilliant. Look, brilliant advice throughout that conversation, Alex. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining me. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.